On my wrist, I have a stunning $3,000 Grand Seiko Quartz GMT sports watch. It's a fairly new release, and this thing is unbelievable. It is one of my very favorite watches. In my right hand, I have another fairly new release. It is a $1,000 micro brand automatic sports watch. It is, of course, the Pitzman II. I've spoken to Pitzman about this watch at great length, and I've learned some pretty cool stuff. So before I head over to the Lightbox to freestyle about this watch, I'm going to share with you what I've learned. For example, did you know they spent 5 years designing and producing the prototypes for this watch? They went through countless redesigns and made prototypes many times, and now they have settled on this. Pretty cool. They've also included in this watch the Sellita SW300, which is an unbelievable movement. It's one of the best movements I've ever handled. I haven't ever seen a watch with this movement in it. The SW200 I think you'll all be familiar with, but the SW300 is quite an upgrade to the SW200. To buy an SW300 costs around $200. It's 3.6 millimeters thick, has a 56-hour power reserve, hacks hand winds, and beats at 28,800 beats per hour. And they regulate every single one before they send them out to the customers. I'm talking about Pitzman. Pitzman regulates the movements before they send them out. That's pretty cool. They've taken inspiration for the shape of the case, and in particular those flared lugs, from Giwa, which is the name given to the shape of the roofs, the tiled roofs that you'll find in South Korea. They sort of kick up on the ends, and yeah, that's what they've used to inspire the shape of this case. And the colours come from, let me read this, Dan Chong, which is essentially a colour palette used historically on the outside of buildings as well. So the grey, the green and the blue colours are inspired by Dan Chong. I did also ask about the steel finishing, because the case, the hands, the applied indices, they all look beautifully finished. And they did confirm that the factories producing these watches are using lapping machines with tin plates. Of course, Grand Seiko refers to that finishing as Zaratsu polishing. They did also say that they don't think their watches are up there with Grand Seiko, which was unexpected but also nice to read, but they are still very happy with the level of finishing they've managed to achieve on all their Pitzman II watches. They did also take the time to tell me how they have incorporated into this bracelet micro adjustment by using sort of 3/4 length links. They've given you a couple of slightly smaller links, and I have produced a video showing you guys how you can use those links to get sort of 3mm adjustment with these bracelets. I thought it was worth producing that video because quite often we see these watches with no micro adjustment on the clasp, and we just assume that the links are half links and that you can't adjust these watches to a fairly micro level. But on this occasion, you absolutely can. I'll put a link to that video in the video description. Right, that's enough waffling. I'm now going to head over to the Lightbox and freestyle. Now I'm starting by showing you both of these watches side by side, and they look quite similar in terms of size and dimensions. They're both all stainless steel sports watches, and actually they're quite similar in weight as well. There are a few other similarities, but obviously there's some fairly clear differences as well. The watch on the left has a quartz GMT movement in it. The watch on the right is a standard three-handed automatic movement. The watch on the left is the Grand Seiko SBGN 027. It now retails in the UK for £2,950. I think it might have gone up in price. That means it's closer to $3,500 US. The watch on the right can be had from the Pitzman website. I'll put a link down in the video description. It's not an affiliate link. It just takes you to their website. No discount codes either. But it's already discounted down to $999 US. So quite a price difference. So I am expecting there to be quite a difference between these two watches, but I am curious to see how close the Pitzman II gets to this, well, entry-level luxury watch. Now, before I move on to the comparison between these two watches, I do just want to spend a little bit more time talking about this Pitzman II, because I didn't cover everything in the introduction, like the accuracy, for example. I've just put this on the time grapher again. It's been on the time grapher 3 or 4 times since receiving it, and every single time it's been fantastically accurate. Not only that, the beat error and amplitude has been pretty much perfect. So when they state that they regulate these watches before sending them out to customers, I believe it. And Yeah, this one's running fantastically well. And I also want to say again how impressed I am with this movement. I have obviously done some research on it. It's a fairly new movement to me, and it does seem to me that this is probably one of the cheapest watches you will find with this movement inside. It is an ETA clone, but it is a sort of entry-level luxury movement. This movement can be found in rather expensive watches, so to see it in this Pitzman II at 999 US dollars was quite a surprise. I was expecting this watch to contain an SW200 or ETA 2824, but no, they've gone a step up in quality and yeah, provided the SW300. And there's the movement. You can see it through the screw down display case back. That is sapphire crystal as well. I have tested it and both pieces of crystal are sapphire. AR coating on the front, and you can see it written there on the display case back. A few other specifications: 56 hours of power reserve, water resistance 150 meters, so screw down case back and a screw down crown, and yeah, custom rotor as well with Pitzman written on it. And the movement is beautifully finished. So yeah, this is really feeling like a luxury watch from a luxury micro brand. Let's finish talking about materials then. 316L stainless steel case, crown. Well, the bezel is a fixed bezel, beautifully polished. I'll come on to that in a minute. Solid end links, solid links, and a milled three-piece clasp. No micro adjusts in the clasp, but don't forget to check out that video where I show you how you can use the smaller links, and there's one of them. Look, there's two smaller links. In fact, I've needed to use both of them to get the perfect fit. And yeah, you can adjust the length of this bracelet down to 3 millimeters. So yeah, everybody should be able to get this watch to fit. Really interesting bracelet as well. 3-link bracelet, but there are some fairly flat surfaces and a mix of finishing as well. You've got brushed surfaces on the top with high polished accents on those angles there, which means lots and lots of light play. Look, you can see in this light box the bracelet just playing with the light a little bit, and the clasp doesn't have a huge outer shell, so you get fairly decent continuation of that bracelet. It's not interrupted too much, but the brushing and the polishing does look incredible, I have to say. That was one of the first things I noticed when I unboxed this watch. I knew it was going to be good because I'd watched some reviews on it. And yeah, so I'd seen some close-ups of this watch and I'd done my homework, but yeah, I am very impressed with the finishing. And I will talk about the finishing in a little bit more detail once I have finished running through the specifications. So yeah, you've got screw pins in the bracelet. I forgot to mention 316L stainless steel throughout the bracelet and the clasp. There is some lume on this watch, and I will film a lume degradation video at the end, so you'll see that towards the end of the video, and you can see that blue AR coating. Look at that, fairly strong AR coating. Now the crystal, it is domed sapphire crystal, and this is one of the weaknesses, I think. I think this dial and the hands and those applied indices and the watch in general deserved double domed sapphire crystal. I'm not a fan of the distortion. Everything under the crystal is so beautiful that I don't really want there to be too much light play interrupting my view through to these incredible hands and applied indices. The hands for me are one of the highlights of this watch. Yeah, they went into a bit of detail in these hands as well, and I don't think these are particularly cheap to reproduce or replace. Yeah, these are on a level with the Grand Seiko, and actually they're quite similar in terms of shape and size. So yeah, I'll show them side by side in a moment. But yeah, beautiful hands, incredible length to them as well. The minute hand reaches right out to the outer edge of the applied indices, and the hour hand reaches right to the inner edge of those applied indices. And those applied indices are really quite interestingly shaped. They're sort of split down the middle with some lume running down the center of those applied indices. There's some really interesting contours and facets on them, high polished, so lots and lots of light play. Yeah, very, very nicely done. And obviously the dial has a minute track around the outside, and yeah, some slightly different finishing. On the outer edge, you've got sort of rings, and then on the inner edge, you've got a fairly sort of plain, simple matte finish with Pitzman sole. It says sole automatic 150M at the bottom above the 6. Right, let's have a look at the finishing. I think I've covered all the specs, so yeah, let's take a look at the steel finishing. This is the bit I enjoy. Now, when it comes to the finishing on this watch, I actually think the hands are the star of the show. The case is incredible, but I do think the hands are just a fraction more impressive. The steel finishing on the case, though, is really, really good. That polished bezel, again, taking a sort of Giwa, what's the word I'm looking for? Silhouette, a silhouette, isn't it? Look at the shape of that bezel and the way it sort of curves downwards. Yeah, they've definitely taken inspiration from Giwa for not only the lugs, but also that bezel. It's a high polished bezel. The polishing seems fantastic. Really interesting profile to the case as well. Again, inspired by Giwa, the way that the case sort of, well, thins towards the bottom, and yeah, you can just see the brushing and the finishing on the top of the lugs and those high polished chamfered edges, fairly delicate edges running all the way around the case and under the bezel. It's been done incredibly well. I have to say they should be very, very pleased with the finishing. And I did like the fact that they said, the finishing on the steel is good. We're not up there with Grand Seiko, which I thought was quite admirable. Normally you would expect brands to say, yeah, we're as good as X, Y, or Z. But no, they were very realistic actually about the finishing. And although they're very, very pleased with it, and they should be, they're also very realistic, which I appreciate. The brushing around the side of the case also looks really, really nice. Now I'm about to try something that I have never done before, and that is film with my macro lens on. This is the lens I use to take all my photos, and I prepare the watches impeccably. I put a lot of time and effort into cleaning the watches, getting the lighting right so that we can see the watches in all their glory and not have the shots ruined by specks of dust and hairs all over the watch. But yeah, I thought on this occasion I would put the macro lens on and just show you some close-ups of these watches live. And as you can see, the hands on this Pitzman II, well, they look perfect. Super crisp, aren't they? Really, really crisp. That flat facet surrounded by those chamfered edges. I don't think I'm getting close enough, am I? Yeah, it looks really, really good. Let's have a look at the Grand Seiko now. And there's the Grand Seiko hands. A fairly coarse brushing, actually, on top of these hands, which is quite noticeable. And then I think, if I can get the light to play around a little bit, high polished edges around the outside of those hands. There you go. Oh, there we go. Look at the tip of the hour hand. And in fact, you can also see that rainbow effect on that applied index because Grand Seiko puts little micro grooves in their applied indices to, well, basically achieve this sort of rainbow effect. But yeah, you can see the light now playing down that high polished edge of the hour hand. But for me, not too dissimilar in terms of crispness and quality to the Pitzman II. Let's have a look at the steel polishing now. And there it is. You can see the light reflections. You see that light strip running around the edge of that curved bezel. It looks quite crisp, doesn't it? You're not seeing, or I'm not seeing, too many streaks or sort of distortions. The light's not being affected too much, which you would see if the steel finishing was poor. But because they're using the techniques that they use, you don't tend to get that streaking. And yeah, there's obviously a lot of skill involved, and that's what makes Grand Seiko so special. They have technicians that have been doing this for decades, and they are the best at it. But that isn't a bad effort at all, is it? That's quite impressive. Let's have a look at the GS. And there it is. Look at that beautifully crisp edge where the bezel changes from a brushed finish to that very delicate, high polished bezel, or chamfered edge, I should say. And again, fairly sort of crisp. You've got that same light strip look. And again, it's a sort of fairly crisp and fairly comparable finish in terms of how clear and streak-free that reflection is. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing a massive difference in terms of steel finishing, although, I mean, you know, Grand Seiko is Grand Seiko. It's impressive, isn't it? I'm actually enjoying this, so I'm going to carry on. I hadn't planned to show you the applied indices at this level of macro, but why not? Yeah, there is the Pitzman II, and they look impressive, don't they? They look fairly clean and crisp, nice and bright, beautifully fitted. There doesn't seem to be any misalignment, and yeah, I'm not seeing any specks or any debris. Yeah, they look very nice and crisp, although I do think now when I show you the Grand Seiko, you're going to see the difference. And there's the Grand Seiko. I think it looks just a fraction more crisp, doesn't it? And yeah, I think it's got the edge. I think you can see that one a little bit more clearly. That under macro, yeah, the GS applied indices are perhaps a touch more crisp. Those corners and edges, yeah, super crisp. And I think also I do prefer that sort of ridged finish in certain lighting conditions. Like I've already shown you, you can get the sort of rainbow effect, which is really, really cool. But yeah, both incredibly well finished watches. And oh, I think I should stop now. I could be here all day looking at these. Right, let me go and wrap it up. What am I talking about? Ignore me. I need to film the Lume degradation comparison video. So yeah, I'm going to pit these watches against each other and see which one has the best Lume. There's obviously a lot more Lume on the Pitzman on the left. But yeah, let's let the clock run down for 5 minutes and see how they degrade. Well, I think I'm going to have to conclude that the Pitzman II has fractionally edged that. It's really, really tight, isn't it? Really, really close. But if you look at the strength of the Lume on the minute hands, the GS seems to have faded a fair bit more than the Pitzman II. So yeah, I'll give that one to the Pitzman. And of course, I need to show you this watch on my wrist as well, don't I, before I head back to the desk and wrap it up. Yeah, I've managed to get, as you would expect, with this level of micro adjustment, because I have used the smaller links to get the perfect fit. It is very, very comfortable. Yeah, perfect size for me, this. And yeah, perfect weight distribution all the way around, because you've got solid links and a milled clasp. Very comfortable on my wrist. There is a little bit of a squeak, so I'm going to talk very briefly about the negatives. A little bit of a squeak in the bracelet, which will go eventually. The crystal as well. Single domed. I'm a little bit disappointed about that. I've already mentioned it. Yeah, it just distorts your view through to the dial and the hands and the applied indices when you're viewing the watch at a slight angle. I just don't think it's necessary. I know double domed crystal would be more expensive, but I think this watch deserves it. The price can certainly carry it. So yeah, I would have preferred to have seen double domed crystal. The finishing on the crown is actually a touch too crisp. They finished it so well that actually when you're winding the crown, you can just feel the sharpness in the logo on the side of the crown. It's very, very minor. It's not going to cut you, but it's just something I noticed. What else? I think that's about it. I can't think of any other negatives, to be honest. Yeah, it's very nice. Well, I finished filming the comparison, and I think initially it didn't look like it was going to be much of a fair fight. I mean, pitting a Grand Seiko against most watches isn't really a fair fight. I mean, Grand Seiko are considered one of the best watch finishers, well, in the world. I mean, they are masters at what they do. But I've got to say, the more I've watched the footage back, the more editing I've done, I am very impressed with how close the Pitzman has got in terms of quality, fit and finish, steel finishing in particular. Yeah, the quality of the dial, the hands, the applied indices, they've got a lot closer than I thought they would. And imagine if someone walked up to you in the street and said, I've got this Grand Seiko here, it's worth around $3,500. You can have it, it's yours. Or you can have this Pitzman, it's got an SW300 in it. And here's $2,500 to go with it. Which one do you want? I think that would be quite a tough choice, wouldn't it? I'm not so sure which one I would take. I mean, Grand Seikos are incredible, but then so is having $2,500 in your back pocket. So yeah, I am impressed with the Pitzman. Its styling is perhaps one of its more divisive elements. I prefer the look of the Grand Seiko, but they're obviously trying to produce incredibly well-built watches, and it looks like they're well on their way. They have shared with me details of their upcoming watches, but they asked me not to share it with you, so yeah, I'm gonna have to keep that secret, but I can't wait. All right, guys, as always, massive thank you from me to you for tuning in. A really long one, but I definitely think this watch deserved all of the effort that's gone into producing this video. And of course, I'm showing you a Grand Seiko as well. Who doesn't want to see Grand Seikos in lots of detail? Incredible, both watches. Right, guys, take care. Thanks for watching.